Good morning, good evening, or good night, whichever one it is for you, whichever one it is. I'm very glad you're here to join me for this week's video because today we are in for some long book recommendations. This time, the contemporary edition, because the last video I did of this sort was about classics that I think are worth your time, really long classics. And I do have to admit, I've read quite a bit more long classics than I have read long contemporary books. Sorry, this dog is kind of distracting me right now. But I still have read some really, really good contemporary books that I think would really be worthwhile to read and that I think are great representations of long books that are just great books and that represent, just as I said in my last video, the concept of long books perfectly, because to me long books are they're the most special kinds of books because you can really live alongside these characters for such a long time, and it's a different kind of experience, a very special one in my opinion, and long books are really my absolute favorite. It's where my heart lies, and so I want to advocate for those books. So in this video I think I'm gonna have 10 books to share with you. There are some more long books on my TBR that are considered contemporary, and I think I'm gonna just talk about them some other time because in this video I really only want to talk about books that I actually know are gonna be worth your time and that are very good books. So without further ado, without rambling, I now have a pile of dogs on me, so we'll see how this goes. But I'm just gonna get right into it by talking about the very first one, which is The Book Thief. Why not start with one of the most heartbreaking ones on this list? Maybe, honestly, the most heartbreaking. I don't think there's another one like it on this list. The Book Thief is the story of Lisa Memminger, who is a little girl. And she is basically who we're following. It's more or less just her life story growing up in Germany. We are in the 1930s, just about, and we are in the years just leading up to and during the Second World War. That is a very specific kind of experience of a little girl in a small town in Germany during the Nazi regime. It is absolutely heartbreaking. First of all, this character is made to feel so vivid and so real, and you feel for her so much. You follow her through so many years and you really start to root for her so much, and it is so tragic because this book originally was for children, or it's written for a much younger audience, which makes it so much more heartbreaking because the writing style is quite simplistic and it is very obvious that you are following a child reading it. That juxtaposition with the heartbreaking themes that are in here, because obviously there are Jews in her life, Jews and just people who are discriminated against actively, and the violence that is omnipresent everywhere. The bombings that are constantly happening. Liesel's childhood also was just so traumatizing. We meet her as she's being taken in by foster parents. Her mother is giving her away. And that in itself, her brother has just died right in front of her eyes. This girl is so traumatized and her circumstances are so traumatizing. But again, seeing that from the lens of a child who knows something is going on that's not right, but who doesn't quite know how to deal with that or how to properly categorize it, maybe doesn't even have the voice or the vocabulary to express what she's feeling. And he still has so many nightmares, and she clearly struggles a lot, but it's more subconsciously than actually vividly something that she can express, which makes you as the reader feel so helpless, because I think everyone can relate to that, to being a child and being unable to really express themselves properly. This story is also obviously very famous for being narrated by death, which is such a cool concept, and it is executed in the most interesting of ways. And I loved it so much. The writing is so beautiful, and Death as a character is one of the most fascinating characters I've ever read about, just because he has a very specific kind of lens on the world, and his passages specifically are, to me, just so poetic. Those are probably the passages I love the most, just viewing humanity, viewing human life and the human condition from an outsider's perspective is a motif I'm just incredibly interested in. And I think this is a book that's maybe done it the best. I don't know if I've ever read anything that's done it this well. On all fronts, I highly recommend it. There's obviously also so many interpersonal relationships here that are so precious to read about. Her stepfather particularly, and her stepmother as well, but for her, it takes a bit longer to warm up for those two. But her stepfather is like, he becomes her dad, and their relationship is one of the most just heart healing things I have ever read. Also, there is this other character. He is sort of the representation of what happened to the Jewish people. He is your way of sort of getting a view into what that must have been like. The experience of being a Jewish person in Germany at the time must have been like. He basically wants to write a children's book. That is his dream, and he ends up doing that throughout the book. And that is something in general. This book is told in many different ways. The chapters are very short, and the children's book that this man writes is interspersed in the book, so you actually get to read what he writes. That is so beautiful because it's also illustrated, and it feels so, I don't know, it gives this story so much more character as well, in my opinion. And it also broke my heart a lot. The last sentence of that book is one that I think about constantly, and it's one that I don't want to tell you because I just think reading it for yourself after having been in that story for so long is such a gut punch, and it had, at least on me, such an impact. And yeah, I highly recommend The Book Thief. Please check it out. By Marcus Zusak, by the way, I haven't said that yet. It is so worth your time. Again, it is on this list probably the easiest to read in terms of language, and the plot is very engaging, but it is so precious, and it is maybe also one of the most precious books on this list, and there is so much to get from it. So yeah, that is my first recommendation, and I highly urge you to check it out if you have not already. The next one I want to talk about is kind of akin to the motif here because we are also following a child, at least at the beginning. I want to talk about The Goldfinch because The Goldfinch is probably honestly my personal favorite on here, or one of my personal favorites here. The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt is the story of Theo Decker, who we meet as he is in Amsterdam randomly, and he is like going through some paranoia, some serious paranoia. The first chapter, you're just kind of put right into the story. The first chapter actually takes place much later in the story than you're actually starting out. This doesn't make any sense. You basically get a sneak peek of what's to happen. And this is how I ended up here. And then you get the actual story. I hope I'm explaining that properly. We find out he is in possession of a painting. And he should not be in possession of that painting. And that is why he is so paranoid. And we also find out he lost his mother quite a long time ago. And that was sort of the catalyst for all of the bad things that have since happened to him, and for the bad situation he is now finding himself in as an adult. And so the next chapter starts out with Theo Decker as a very young boy narrating to us what happens. We meet him on the day his mom died. And we follow him for years and years up to the point we have seen him at in the first chapter and beyond. And we see him grow up as a young boy who has just lost his mom to a terrorist attack, basically an act of domestic terrorism. It's one of those stories I have a very hard time describing because it's so varied and there is so much in it that I don't really know how to do it the justice it deserves. But first of all, the most obvious thing, Donna Tartt is an incredible writer. It is beautifully written, in my opinion, very engaging, although it's very much a quiet story. It's not as high-paced or as high action as some other stories may be, but it's the perfect kind of story for me. You are getting such a deep insight into Theo as a character and into the people he is encountering throughout his life. There are so many aspects here, also found family. Theo, because his mom loved art, and she sort of instilled that in him. So his love for art and his relationship to art is a very particular kind of thing, and it is so beautifully done. And as someone who loves art with a passion, this put words to feelings I had that I didn't know how to express. And so if you love art or beauty in general, or if you have any kind of interest, if you have any special kind of love for anything, I think this would really work very well for you because it's put so beautifully. Also, the people he encounters are really such a special part of this story as well, because obviously he's put in a situation where he is all alone. He is way too young to advocate for himself. He has no control over his situation after his mom dies. He is very much in the clutches of the system, and it is also a story of how the system fails people, children specifically, and how just horrible that can be when you just sort of get lost in all of it, and when no one really has your best interest at mind. At least it feels like that helpless feeling that I think also, just like in The Book Thief, anyone can relate to, because we've all been young, we've all wished for more autonomy than we've actually had, and we have all felt helpless at some point. At least I think so. So this is just gonna be so relatable to, I think, just about anybody. Theo is a very interesting character because he's not a hero. He's not perfect. He has so many faults. He makes so many decisions that I disagree with. But it is so vivid, and that makes him so human, which is so important if you follow a character, that they feel human, especially if you follow them for so long and so intricately. It needs to be that way, and it's done so well. One of the best character studies I've ever read. The aspect of found family is also something I just absolutely love here. It's done so preciously. And it is very much the kind of story where, although the subject matter is very dark and there is so much tragedy, so much sadness, so much suffering and injustice here, there is also so much beauty. And oh, I should have mentioned that with The Book Thief as well. There is so much beauty there as well. And The Goldfinch is very much a story like that, where so many precious aspects in this story make it almost feel hopeful. It's a story that wouldn't allow for that, you would think, but it doesn't read as overly sad. It does not read as gratuitous. That is a very well done balance that I really enjoyed. Again, I hope I'm doing a book justice. I fear I am not. But I urge you to check it out, because if you like slower moving books, if you like intricate character studies, if you like art, if you like Charles Dickens, honestly, this is the perfect kind of book for someone who loves Charles Dickens, because it very much reads like a Charles Dickens book. So yeah, that is The Goldfinch. Please check it out. Next up, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is a shorter one. It's one of the shorter, long books I'm gonna talk about in this video. The Night Circus is about a circus who only comes to town at night. Let me just read it to you because the book describes it so much better than I could. The circus arrives without warning. No announcements preceded, no paper notices on downtown posts and billboards, no mentions or advertisements in local newspapers. It is simply there when yesterday it was not. And yeah, this is the story of that circus, basically. I don't want to say too much about it because I think this is one of those stories it really does well just going into it not knowing anything. That is, in my opinion, the best way to read this story or consume it. It is magical. Absolutely magical. In my opinion, it is perfect for the later months of the year. So we are at the perfect time of the year for you to pick it up if you have not already. It centers around a rivalry between two magicians that has gone on for generations, basically. And those two magicians have both appointed and trained since childhood two people who are basically continue on their legacy of this rivalry. And one is a woman, one is a man. It's about their rivalry and how intricately that is connected to the circus itself, how magic upholds that circus and what magic has to do with the circus. I don't think I can properly explain this story either. It is too magical and there is too much in it. It is just beautifully written, so magical. On this list, I think this is the book I read the quickest. I think I just flew through it. It's the kind of book where you pick it up and you read for what feels like a minute or two, but then next you know you're like 50 pages into the book. I have very rarely had this experience of just a book literally flying by and me not noticing how much I've been reading. There are also many underlying commentaries on how you should and should not treat your children, how you can sometimes, without doing it on purpose, really mess up people, and how you can instill trauma in people without meaning to, or maybe through meaning to. There is a lot of education here. There is a lot of literature in here as well. And just history, so much history. It is one of those stories where, on the one hand, it does feel modern, but it also kind of feels timeless. It is the perfect kind of contemporary book, in my opinion, or for someone of my taste who prefers classics usually, because I think this feels like a classic, but a modernized version of it. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the mystery at the core because this is kind of based on a mystery. You really want to figure out what is going on. There are some of the most unique characters in here ever. They are so interesting to follow. It's a very tight-knit community at the end of the day. Although this book is basically about this rivalry, there is so much community, so much loyalty, But at the same time, betrayal and mistrust, it is a very interesting sort of concept. And it's a juxtaposition on one hand, but it works so well. It is just perfect. I don't know why you wouldn't read it. It's just really, really, really good. And I highly recommend it. Then let us talk about A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, which is one of the most recent reads on this list for me, and I just needed to talk about it because this is such a special story. We follow a man called Count Rostov, who at the beginning of the story, he writes a politically charged poem during a time in Russia where the revolution is going on. We are set in the early 1900s. He writes that poem, releases the poem, and then leaves for France for several years. And when he comes back, Russia is just on the outskirts of the revolution, or we are still kind of in a tumultuous time in Russia. We are in the 1920s at this point. The Tsar and his family have just been killed. The monarchy has been abolished. And now the mere concept of nobility is very offensive to people. And when Rostov comes back to Russia, he is immediately put to court. That is the very first thing we read of him, is him being arrested and put under house arrest for the rest of his life in this hotel in Russia, in Moscow. That is where he's now going to live his entire life. He is 20 or in his early 20s at this point. We follow him from there. The story is basically just him moving into this hotel, they put him in the attic. Because he is a nobleman, he is used to a very lavish, just very pompous life. And now suddenly he lives in the attic of a hotel that he will never be able to leave. Which psychologically and materialistically, I imagine it must have given you whiplash if you were in that kind of situation. The story is basically just him trying to come to terms with this new situation he's finding himself in and trying his absolute best to make the best of that situation. He spends a lot of his time going through memories and inside of nostalgia, basically. He is a very nostalgic person and his circumstances enhance that a lot. We, through that, get to know so much about Russia at the time, the Russian climate, specifically the experience of being a nobleman in Russia. He also has this really great love for Russian literature, the Russian classics specifically. Also, other kinds of literature, just literature in general, but the Russian classics specifically are very prevalent here. A lot of them are mentioned: Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Pushkin, Bulgakov, Turgenev. There are so many more, and it is really nice because I think this is the kind of story, if you are scared of classics, specifically Russian classics, this is the perfect story for you, because in many ways it does feel like a Russian classic, but it is a bit more modernized, and I think this is a story that would give you a lot of footing to maybe starting to check out some of those Russian classics that are mentioned here, because I think it makes them more accessible. If you are intimidated by Russian classics, try reading A Gentleman in Moscow first. And if you liked that one, if you liked what it did, if you liked the pacing of it, if you liked the psychology of it, the social commentary of it, then maybe start checking out some of the stories that are mentioned in the book, because I just think more people should read Russian classics. I think they are over amplified in how, people just talk about how difficult they are constantly, and I highly disagree. I mean, of course, you don't have to start with War and Peace or The Brothers Karamazov, but there are so many more, Crime and Punishment or Anna Karenina. There are so many good ones that are so accessible. But this is kind of a tangent that has nothing to do with the actual thing. Count Rostov, he is in this hotel and he cannot leave the hotel. Which is interesting because I said this when I first talked about the book, but that as a concept creates a fascinating atmosphere because hotels are transient places. People do not stay in hotels. They leave constantly. But Rostov can't. And so he is in a place where he is constantly surrounded by people, but none of them ever stay. And so he is kind of all alone. It is this motif of being all alone and lonely while you're surrounded by people. It's so well done here. It is so well executed. It really makes you feel for him. It also goes through the different stages. As the years pass, because we follow him over 30 years exactly, he goes through spirals a lot. It's so interesting to follow his character progression as well. Because at the beginning of the story, he's a nobleman who has been used to being a nobleman his entire life. He's used to a certain standard of living and to the social hierarchy that nobility just comes with implicitly, which means that the concept of befriending the staff at the hotel it's not something he's even thinking about at the beginning. And you see that sort of change over time. You see him develop, you see him questioning some of the presumptions he has had, and he goes through a lot of development in that sense. And he does manage to create some really special bonds with people. He shows you the resilience of the human mind and of the human species in a way. It is also very well written, but it's not one of those stories that I would call overly wordy or flowery. It's not poetic, but it's beautifully written. It's just a bit more simple than some of the other stories on this list, which I really enjoy. It's a very nice concept. The social critique in this book, for one, is of course because of the nobility. There is also a lot of political just commentary here because of the time of Russia we're following. It's about the hypocrisy of, for one, the nobility, but also the new regime, how things seem to have changed, but really everything is exactly the same, and the oppression people still face. It's a really good story and I highly recommend it. I think it's very accessible. It is slow moving and meandering at a point, which I enjoy. You just have to know yourself as a reader to know, do you like stories that move a bit slower, that again are just really about the inner life and the mundanity of this man's life? If you like that, you will find so much to love in this story. I found it very comforting. I found it very enjoyable. I found it to be an escape. And although it deals with, as I said, a lot of critiques of social situations, of government, of politics, of gender roles as well, but it never feels overly done. It never feels very negative. It has the kind of perfect combination of heavy topics, but in a very light format. So maybe check out A Gentleman in Moscow. I recommend it. I think it is a very good story. All right, and now we come to the Stephen King section of the video, because Stephen King I have read the most long books of, and the ones I'm going to talk about today are, first of all, Bag of Bones by Stephen King. Bag of Bones is the story of a writer whose wife has just died. It is essentially just a story about grief, about this writer trying to come to terms with his grief and the very sinister things that leads to. Because he and his wife, they owned this cottage at a lake called Sarah Laughs. And this cottage seems to be haunted. The man starts to have these dreams that basically call him to the cottage. And at one point, he becomes so haunted, he stops being able to write. He is a writer. So he having a writer's block that goes on for years and years is not kind of the ideal thing. And so in hopes of alleviating this writer's block, he goes to the cottage. And that is where really the main action starts in the book. Some really horrible things seem to have happened in the past there. Also, another element of this story that I found the most precious is he encounters this really, I think she must be 7 years old or so, a girl who he meets in a very interesting situation. And he develops a relationship with the mother of the girl and also the girl herself. And it is very, very much kind of found family also. In a very special, I found it very special and very nice to read. It loosened up the story a bit. It gave it a lot more heart and a lot more to be invested in. It was so refreshing because this is one of his most dark books. Because this is one of those books that are dark because of the people that are in it and because of the horrific things people are capable of. And those to me are the hardest books to read. I don't find supernatural books or magical books very difficult to read or very scary at all. And I think that is quite normal to be more scared of people. And that is, in that case, that is going to be a very, very interesting experience for you. Let me warn you right off the bat. We do get to learn a lot about what happened in the past here, and that is so difficult to read. And check out, please just Google, check out the trigger warnings for Bag of Bones before you actually read the book, because I wish I had, because this is, among all of Stephen King's stories, this is the one that kind of traumatized me a bit. I really don't like thinking about that aspect of the story, let us say that. Other than that, I think there was so much interesting stuff done here. Stephen King is just a master of creating an atmosphere and of creating these really interesting characters. Bag of Bones is not one of his most quick-moving stories. It is quite slow, but interesting, because I think the way grief is explored here is so well done. And it is so relatably done. I have not been in the kind of situation this man is in, but I felt like I had at the end of the story. And I think it took a lot of turns. Stephen King books always kind of, you think you know what it's gonna be, you know what's going on, but then suddenly a turn takes place and now you don't know anything at all anymore. There is commentary on racism. I don't know how well it's done, honestly. I don't know if Stephen King is the best person to comment on those kinds of subjects. But there was an attempt here. And if you try to look past some of the iffy things, I think the core of the story brings up so many great points and points that'll really make you think. I think it was very good. Just recommended with a kind of caveat at the end. Check out the trigger warnings. If those are things you can read about, then read the book. Otherwise, just stay very, very far away from it. But yeah, that is Bag of Bones. Then we have The Dead Zone, also by Stephen King, which is among my favorites by him. It is about a man, very much just the quintessential, ordinary, completely normal man. He has this accident and he enters a coma. He's in a coma for a few years. When he gets out of the coma, he kind of develops a psychic ability of sorts. He's always had these gut instincts about people, but when he comes out of the coma, those gut instincts become a lot more obvious and a lot more all-consuming. I don't really want to tell you anything more about the story, except that I think this is one of Stephen King's most highly philosophical stories. I found there were so many things to think about. And it is why the story specifically means so much to me, because I think there is so much here about life and death, and destiny and fate. I'm trying to put this in a way that won't give away anything, but I fear that I will give away things. So just know that it is a very engaging book. A lot of things happen and there is an underlying mystery here. There is also murder going on. We follow different characters and there is someone here who is killing people, and who maybe will be encountered by our main character. There is also political stuff, a lot of political commentary. And in this case, I think it's done well. But to me, the merit of the story really lies in its philosophy and in its explorations of what kinds of things are meant to happen, what kinds of things are not. The motif of having a debt to pay to destiny. Yeah, I don't think I can say anything more because it's just, I'm gonna give away so much. Yeah, if you like Stephen King at his more philosophical, then I think you will really enjoy the story. It is, again, one of my favorites for a reason. That is The Dead Zone. Highly, highly recommend. One that I think you need to read immediately. Run and buy this book immediately or get your hands on it whatever way you can. It is Insomnia by Stephen King. This is by far my favorite by him. It's the first by him I read, but it is still my favorite. All of these books later, so that goes to show something. Insomnia is the story of a man whose wife dies at the very beginning of the story. Like in Bag of Bones, but very different from Bag of Bones. His wife dies, and the man, maybe because of his grief, maybe because of other situations, we don't know, he starts waking up a bit earlier every single day. No matter how late he goes to bed, he always wakes up a bit earlier than he did the last day. And that goes on until one day he just stops sleeping. He is unable to sleep. He has the quintessential definition of insomnia. And as things go on, you see him psychologically unravel because of his lack of sleep. There are also many different kinds of things going on in this town he lives in. He sort of starts seeing these little men. He starts seeing very interesting kinds of things about people, about his surroundings, a lot of stuff. He sees a lot of stuff that he should not be seeing. It is one of those books, how do I describe a book like Insomnia? I really don't know. I think I lack the words. And I also, again, think you should go into it as blindly as possible. A prevalent motive here is domestic violence. The effects of that, because you see a relationship firsthand that this man witnesses between a younger couple that lives on the street he lives on, that is so difficult to read about. I think it portrayed that subject matter really well. But above all else, the reason I love Insomnia so much, the reason I think it is among all of Stephen King's books, the by far most underrated one and the one that I think all the people should read, is because Insomnia is one of the most highly spiritual and philosophical books that Stephen King certainly has ever written about human life, humanity from the standpoint of an outsider's perspective, but so much more than that. So many commentaries on life and what life means, and also destiny. There is this really interesting concept created here about how death works and the whole machinations behind that. And how death, even though it seems scary, maybe it's just a part of human existence. And I don't want to give anything away, so I think I'll stop here. But Insomnia to me is just a story that anyone could love because it has the fast pacing of a Stephen King book. It has the intrigue, there is a mystery. It has this really interesting psychological observation of what happens to a human being who stops sleeping completely. And we're not talking about a few days, we are talking for months. Insanely interesting, that in itself. Also the mystery, there is a murder plot here, or an assassination plot. That is very interesting. There is through that also commentary on feminism and the dangers of being a feminist, specifically still at that time, because this is an earlier Stephen King book. And again, the philosophy, the spiritual aspects of this story are for me the most enjoyable. For any kind of Stephen King reader, and for readers who have not read Stephen King, Insomnia is the book for you. I highly recommend it. I would be so curious to know if you've read it, and if you do read it now, let me know what you think. Because in my opinion, this is a book that anyone could love. So yeah, I will put the finger away now, and I will stop talking about Insomnia. But yeah, just know Insomnia has my stamp of approval. All right, now let us talk about The Books of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk. The longest book on this list, and it is at the end for a reason. Because The Books of Jacob is a book that very much feels like a long book. It is about Jacob Frank, who is a messiah, or he is based on an actual religious figure of the Jewish faith, a person who was seen as a messiah in the 1750s, starting in the 1750s. It is highly based in historical information and historical facts. Many of these characters we're going to be following have actually existed. The author did so much research here to make this as historically accurate as she possibly could, and it really felt like just a magnum opus of historical information. And that is where the caveat lies as well, because it makes this book a very specific kind of book for a very specific kind of person. Because yes, at the core, we follow Jakob Frank and how he becomes the Messiah and what happens afterwards. We follow many decades of this man's life. And through that, we follow Poland and, in a sense, the world. The story is interspersed, as all of Olga's books, as far as I know, are, with pictures. In this case, actual pictures of the time, sketches of places, sketches of people, portraits, and just things, sometimes clothes, which really give you an idea of where you are, how the people looked, what you're gonna be imagining in your head. It's not told linearly, and it's not told just in one way. You encounter Jakob again and again through different people, through his enemies, through his followers. And because of that, you get very differing perspectives on who this man was and how people saw him. And depending on whose opinion you are hearing of this man, it is going to be a very different experience and a very different view you're gonna get on him. And you yourself, through following him for so long, because there are also just narratives of him himself just living his life and the way he chooses to conduct himself as this religious figure who is very admired. It gives you a very good idea of, I think it is very obvious what this book is trying to do, because to me this reads, I think it is just religious critique, and I think that is where you should place this book. It is a highly historically based work of religious criticism. This is the only book I've ever read that is on par, maybe even above War and Peace, in the complexity of the narrative and also the amount of characters. I would have to look that up. But I would presume this book actually has more characters than War and Peace in it, which I loved. I loved it so much. It is really a very complex kind of book. I don't think it will be very enjoyable for many people. I think it's a very niche kind of book. But if you love history, like you really, really have to love history in my opinion. If you love philosophy, if you love psychology, If you love religious criticism, this is the book for you. Because honestly, it is one of the most unique books I have ever read, one of the most enjoyable experiences. It is quite something to get to live in this world for so long because of how historically accurate Olga made this book. It feels like you are actually reading just a history book. And I think if you are that sort of person, this is going to be such a precious read to you because there is so much here. You get such a vivid idea of how life in Poland looked at the time. You follow clergymen, you follow nobility, you follow kings and queens, you follow very, very poor peasants, you follow merchants, you follow religious figures, you follow their followers, you follow women and men and children and elderly. You follow a person who's kind of almost dead, but not really, and she was my absolute favorite, I think. Just the amount of commentary in that character alone, the juxtaposition between this female character we're following, who basically is a god at this point. Not a god, but she is definitely a supernatural being juxtaposed to this man who is supposed to be a religious leader, but who is so filled with cruelty and just humanity. He is so human in a very derogatory kind of way. I mean this derogatorily. This is the kind of book I would love to write a thesis on, even though I don't even study literature. But it is just, God, you could say so many things about this book. If you are willing to really sit with a book, because this is a book, it's gonna take you a long time. And I think this is a book where you should take a long time. This is not the kind of book you can just consume in a few days, because then it's just gonna get way too much. But if you want to live in a story for a long time, if you want to get really in-depth insight into the conflicts between specifically the Christian faith and the Jewish faith, but also the Muslim faith, because those are all kind of interconnected here. There is a lot of oppression here, specifically religious oppression, which is incredibly hard to read about at times, but it is so well done because this is such a fundamental aspect of history. And I really appreciated the insights that book gave me and just the amount of knowledge I now have, because of course this is the kind of book where you then want to do so much more research to know which aspects were the ones that were actually inspired by actual historical facts. Also, there is so much regarding gender roles and the mistreatment of women, but done in a very good way, just like everything else in this book. And that is why I'm saying this kind of reads more like a history book. Things are told to you as facts. The aspects of oppression or of mistreatments are never lingered on. Specifically when it comes to women, the treatment of women, like how oppressed they are, how they're basically just seen as objects to fulfill men's wishes, how they have absolutely no autonomy. The marriages that are created between girls that are 10, sometimes under 10 years old, with men who are 50, 60, 70 years old. That is never lingered on, but the mere fact that it is stated gives you such a stomach ache. There is so much abuse here as well. It is never actively commented on, which I think is the most effective thing, because this is the kind of book, it doesn't spoon feed you anything, but reading it, you just cannot help but notice all of the criticism that is put to you here. And you get to come to those conclusions yourself, which is the kind of story I love the most, the kind of story where nothing is spoon-fed to you, but everything is very obvious anyways. That is a talent. That goes to show how talented Olga Tokarczuk is, because in my opinion, that is a difficult thing to do. It is one of those books that will stay with you forever, that will have such an impact on you. If you do manage to get through it, I think this is such an enriching experience, and it is such a worthy book to read, and I think it is really, really worth every single minute you spend within it, just for the experience and just for the amount of knowledge and also the amount of work that was put into creating this book. This is a book filled with so much love by this author, and that comes across so much. And you see how much she tried to do this subject matter justice and how much of herself she put into this. I am in such awe of this woman. Yeah, so maybe if this sounded interesting to you, check out the books of Jacob. I think it could potentially change your life. Okay, but with that, we are at the end of the video. those were all of my long contemporary book recommendations. I hope maybe there were some among these books that you are now going to want to check out, because I think they are all very good for different reasons. Also, if you have any recommendations, please keep them coming. I always appreciate that. I hope you are having a nice day. If you are not having a nice day, that is fine too. I am thinking about you either way. And I am so, so grateful you were here. I am already looking forward to seeing you again next week. And until then, bye-bye.